The transport shuttle descended through Viridian Prime's violet atmosphere, its hull shuddering as it broke through cloud layers that swirled like liquid amethyst. Commander James Chen gripped the armrest, watching the alien world materialize below, sprawling cities of crystalline towers that caught the light of three distant suns, casting prismatic shadows across landscapes of deep crimson vegetation. This was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission. 3 months of cultural exchange, technology sharing, and treaty negotiations. Nothing in his 12 years of service with the Terran Expeditionary Fleet had prepared him for what awaited on the surface. The Viridian Empire had initiated first contact 18 months ago, their ships appearing at the edge of Terran space with technology that made humanity's most advanced vessels look like children's toys. But they came in peace. Their Empress had assured the United Earth Council. They sought allies, not subjects, trade, not conquest. And so humanity had eagerly accepted the invitation to send representatives to their throne world, desperate to forge bonds with a civilization that could either elevate them to new heights or crush them without effort. James was chosen for his language skills, his adaptability, and his unflappable demeanor under pressure. At 34, he'd navigated tense negotiations with hostile factions on the outer colonies, survived an assassination attempt on Proxima Station, and maintained his composure during a reactor breach that killed half his crew. He thought he could handle anything. He was wrong. The shuttle's landing struts kissed the platform with barely a whisper, and the hatch hissed open to reveal the greeting party. 7 Viridians stood in precise formation, their tall frames draped in flowing garments that seemed woven from starlight itself. But James's attention fixed immediately on the figure at the center, taller than the rest by half a head, her skin a deep sapphire blue that seemed to emit its own soft luminescence. Her eyes were solid gold, without visible pupils, and her hair cascaded down her back in waves of silver white that moved as if underwater even in the still air. Commander Chen. Her voice resonated with harmonics that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to something deeper. I am Crown Princess Keyleth, fourth daughter of the Eternal Throne. You will be under my personal protection during your stay on Viridian Prime. James descended the ramp, acutely aware of how small he felt next to these beings. The average Viridian stood nearly 7 feet tall, their builds deceptively slender but clearly possessing strength beyond human capability. Keyleth herself towered at least 7.5 feet, and the way she moved suggested coiled power held in perfect control. Your Highness. James executed the bow his cultural briefing had prescribed, 30 degrees, hands at sides, 3 seconds duration. The United Earth Council extends its gratitude for your hospitality. Her golden eyes tracked his every movement, and something in her gaze made his skin prickle with awareness. Not hostility exactly, but an intensity of focus that felt almost predatory. Come, we have much to discuss, and you must be tired from your journey. The royal complex sprawled across several square miles, a maze of soaring architecture that defied human engineering principles. Bridges of solidified light connected towers that seemed to float without support. Gardens grew upward as much as outward, with bioluminescent flora that painted the air with drifting spores of colored light. James tried to absorb everything, knowing his reports back to Earth would need to capture the overwhelming alien beauty of this place. Keyleth led him through corridors where the walls themselves seemed alive, their surfaces rippling with patterns that might have been decoration or might have been some form of communication. Servants bowed as they passed, and James noticed the way they kept their eyes averted from the princess, not from fear, he sensed, but from reverence. Your quarters, Keyleth announced, gesturing to an archway that irised open at her approach. They have been prepared according to the specifications your people provided. I trust you will find them adequate. The suite beyond was larger than his entire apartment back on Earth, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the capital city. But what struck him most was how the space had been modified for human comfort. furniture at appropriate heights, lighting adjusted to the yellow spectrum his species preferred, even what appeared to be a coffee maker on a side table, though he had no idea how they'd acquired one. "It's more than adequate," James said, genuinely impressed. "Thank you for your consideration." Keyleth stepped inside, and the door sealed behind her with a soft chime. James felt his pulse quicken slightly. His briefing had mentioned nothing about private meetings on the first day, especially not with royalty of her rank. She moved to the window, her silhouette backlit by the setting suns, and for a long moment said nothing. "Tell me, Commander," she finally spoke, still facing the view. "What do you know of Viridian bonding customs?" The question caught him off guard. "Very little, Your Highness. Our briefings focused primarily on political structure and trade protocols. Cultural matters of that nature were deemed secondary." Of course they were. A hint of amusement colored her tone. She turned to face him, and in the dimming light her skin's luminescence became more pronounced, casting subtle blue shadows across her features. "Your people always prioritize the practical over the personal. It is a curious trait." "We're a young species," James offered, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Still learning our place in the larger galactic community." "Young, yes." Keyleth crossed the room toward him, her movements fluid and unhurried. "Which makes what I am about to tell you either very fortunate or very complicated, depending on one's perspective." She stopped an arm's length away, close enough that James caught her scent, something like ozone and honey and thunderstorms, completely alien yet not unpleasant. Her golden eyes studied his face with that same intense focus, and he found himself unable to look away. "In Viridian culture," she continued, "there exists a phenomenon we call the resonance. It occurs perhaps once in 1,000 lifetimes when two beings encounter each other and their life forces align in perfect harmony. It is not love, not initially. It is recognition, a knowing at the deepest level that this person is meant to be yours and you are meant to be theirs." James felt his mouth go dry. "That sounds like something from a fairy tale." "Your people have similar legends, I'm told. Soulmates, true love, destiny." Her head tilted slightly, hair cascading over one shoulder. "But for Viridians it is not legend. It is biological reality, and I experienced it the moment I saw you descending from your shuttle." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying and thrilling all at once. James's training kicked in, the part of him that stayed rational even in crisis. "Your Highness, I'm honored that you would share this with me, but surely there's been a mistake. We're different species. The biological compatibility alone is irrelevant to resonance." Keyleth reached out, her fingers hovering just above his chest without making contact. "It cares nothing for politics or biology or what should be possible. It simply is." "But I'm here as a representative of Earth," James protested, even as part of him wondered why he was protesting at all. Any personal involvement with Viridian nobility could compromise the mission. "The treaties." "The treaties will be signed regardless," Keyleth interrupted. "My mother values the alliance with humanity too highly to let personal matters interfere. But that does not change what I feel when I look at you, Commander. And unless I am very much mistaken, you feel it too." James wanted to deny it, to fall back on protocol and professionalism, but she was right. From the moment he'd seen her on the landing platform, something had pulled at him, a magnetism that went beyond mere physical attraction. It felt like recognition, exactly as she described, like remembering someone he'd never met. "Even if what you're saying is true," he said carefully, "I'm only here for 3 months. Then I return to Earth. What kind of bond could we form in that time?" Keyleth's expression softened, something almost vulnerable flickering across her features. "The kind that matters more than time, perhaps. Or perhaps we discover that resonance is only the beginning, and what we build from it is up to us." She stepped back, giving him space. "I did not come here to pressure you, Commander. Only to be honest about what I sense between us. What you do with that information is your choice." She moved toward the door, which opened at her approach. Before stepping through, she glanced back over her shoulder. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow your official duties begin. But know that if you wish to explore this connection, I am willing, eager even. My people do not often find their resonance, and when we do not let it slip away easily." Then she was gone, leaving James alone with thoughts that spun like debris in a hurricane. He moved to the window, staring out at the alien city, trying to process what had just happened. Part of him insisted this was a trap, some test or manipulation he couldn't yet perceive. But another part, deeper and more primal, recognized the truth in her words. Something had shifted when their eyes met. Something fundamental. He spent a restless night in the oversized bed, dreams filled with golden eyes and blue skin, and the ghost sensation of being known completely by a stranger. When morning came, if it could be called morning, when 3 suns rose in sequence, painting the sky in bands of orange and violet and green, he found himself both dreading and anticipating the day ahead. The first week passed in a blur of meetings and tour and introductions. James met with trade ministers and science advisors, military commanders and cultural historians. He transmitted detailed reports back to Earth, carefully leaving out any mention of the princess's revelation. That was personal, he told himself, not relevant to his mission parameters. But Keyleth was never far away. She attended many of the official functions, always positioned where he could see her, always watching him with those unsettling golden eyes. They spoke little during these public encounters, maintaining the formal distance appropriate to their respective positions. Yet James felt the pull constantly, like a tide he was powerless to resist. On the 8th day, she invited him to dine privately. Not a formal state dinner, she specified through a messenger, but a casual meal where they might speak freely. Every instinct told James to decline, to maintain proper boundaries. But he accepted anyway, unable to deny his curiosity any longer. The meal took place in a smaller chamber adjoining her personal quarters, intimate by Veridian standards though still palatial by human ones. She wore simpler clothing than her court attire, a flowing garment of deep blue that complemented her skin tone. A table had been set with dishes from both their worlds, a thoughtful gesture that didn't escape his notice. "Thank you for coming," Keyleth said, as servants placed the first course before them. "I know you've been avoiding me." "Not avoiding," James corrected, "being cautious." "Is there a difference?" She smiled, and it transformed her face from regal to almost playful. "You are afraid of what you feel. I understand. It goes against everything your training has taught you about emotional control and professional distance." "Does it not concern you?" James asked, trying a dish that looked like crystallized fruit but tasted like roasted meat. "The complications this could cause." Keyleth considered the question while she ate, her movements elegant even in the simple act of bringing food to her mouth. "My people do not view resonance as a complication, Commander. We view it as a gift. When 2 souls recognize each other across the vastness of existence, it is cause for celebration, not concern. But the political implications will sort themselves out or they won't." She set down her utensil, fixing him with that intense gaze. "Tell me honestly, James, if you were not a commander and I were not a princess, would you want to pursue this connection?" The use of his first name sent a small thrill through him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never felt anything like this before. It's disorienting." "For me as well," Keyleth confessed. "I have lived 143 of your years and never once experienced resonance. I had begun to believe I was one of the unfortunate ones who would never know this bond." Her voice dropped to something almost vulnerable. "And then a human steps off a shuttle, and everything I thought I understood about my life shifts." They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing from serious to silly and back again. James learned that Keyleth had trained as a warrior before her diplomatic duties consumed her time, that she loved ancient poetry and hated formal dances, that she felt trapped sometimes by the weight of royal expectation. She learned that he'd grown up on Mars colony, that his mother had died when he was 12, that he'd joined the fleet to escape the memory of loss that haunted every familiar street. When he finally returned to his quarters in the small hours, James felt something shifting in his carefully constructed walls. The princess was not what he'd expected. She was brilliant and funny and surprisingly vulnerable beneath her regal bearing. And the more time he spent with her, the harder it became to deny the pull between them. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks: public formality during official functions, private warmth during their increasingly frequent private dinners. James told himself they were just getting to know each other, exploring this strange resonance as a curiosity rather than acting on it. But he knew he was lying to himself. It was during a tour of the Royal Archives, 6 weeks into his stay, that things changed. Keyleth was showing him ancient texts about Viridian history, her passion for her people's past evident in every word. They stood close together, examining a holographic projection of an artifact, and her hand brushed against his. The contact sent electricity through his skin, and when he looked up, he found her golden eyes fixed on him with unmistakable hunger. "I tire of pretending," she said softly. "Do you not feel this, James, this need between us?" He did. God help him, he did. It had grown from that first spark of recognition into a constant ache, a gravitational pull that made every moment apart feel like wasted time. "What happens if we stop pretending?" he asked, his voice rough. "We discover what resonance truly means." She raised her hand, cupping his face with a gentleness that belied her strength. "But I need you to choose this freely, not because of diplomatic pressure or exotic curiosity, because you want me as much as I want you." James closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her palm against his cheek. Every rational thought screamed at him to step back, to maintain boundaries, to remember his duty. But beneath those learned responses lay something more fundamental: desire, yes, but also recognition. The sense that he'd been searching for something all his life without knowing it, and had finally found it in the most impossible place. "I want you," he admitted, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. "I've wanted you since that first day, and it terrifies me." Keyleth's smile was radiant. Terror often accompanies the most worthwhile endeavors. She leaned down. She always had to lean down, he noted with wry amusement, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was unlike anything James had experienced. Her lips were cooler than human, with a texture like silk over steel, and that exotic scent surrounded him completely. But beyond the physical differences lay something transcendent, a sense of rightness that went soul-deep. This was what resonance meant, he understood suddenly. This feeling of coming home to a place he'd never been. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Keyleth rested her forehead against his. "Come to my quarters tonight," she whispered. "Not as a diplomat, not as a commander, just as you." James nodded, beyond words. The rest of the day passed in a haze. He went through the motions of his scheduled meetings, but his mind remained fixed on the evening ahead. He was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, potentially jeopardizing everything he'd worked for. But he couldn't bring himself to care. When he arrived at her quarters that evening, Keyleth answered the door herself, having dismissed her usual attendants. She wore that simple blue garment again, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. The rooms beyond were dimly lit, intimate in a way he hadn't seen before. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted, stepping aside to let him enter. "I almost didn't." James moved into the space, hyper-aware of her presence behind him. "This is probably the least professional thing I've ever done." "Perhaps professionalism is overrated." She came up behind him, her hands settling on his shoulders. "Perhaps some things matter more than protocols and proper behavior." James turned to face her, reaching up to touch her face. In heels, she would have been nearly a foot taller than him. But barefoot as she was now, the difference was slightly less dramatic. Still, he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "Show me," he he said simply. "Show me what resonance means to your people." What followed was a revelation. Keyleth's touch was simultaneously gentle and demanding, her strength carefully controlled as she led him toward her sleeping chamber. Their clothing became an impediment quickly shed, and James discovered that despite the obvious differences in their biologies, compatibility was not an issue. Her skin glowed brighter in arousal, casting blue light across the walls, and the sounds she made when he touched her in certain places were definitely not human, but no less beautiful for it. They learned each other's bodies with exploration both tender and passionate, communication flowing without words. Keyleth was careful with her superior strength, but James could feel the power coiled beneath her skin, the constant awareness that she could crush him without effort yet chose instead to cradle him like something precious. It was intoxicating, being desired so completely by someone so formidable. When they finally joined, the sensation was overwhelming. James felt something click into place, as if a circuit had been completed. Keyleth gasped, her eyes widening, her luminescence intensifying until the entire room glowed with blue-white radiance. She moved above him, her silver hair creating a curtain around their faces, and in her golden eyes he saw wonder and possessiveness and something that might have been triumph. The pleasure built between them like a wave, cresting higher and higher until it broke in a cascade that left them both shaking. Keyleth cried out in her own language, words James didn't understand but felt in his bones. He held her tightly as the aftershocks rippled through them both, her weight a welcome pressure against his chest. When their breathing finally slowed, Keyleth propped herself up on her elbows, looking down at him with an expression of deep satisfaction. "It is done," she murmured, tracing patterns on his chest. "You are mine now, James Chen, truly and completely mine." "Yours," he agreed, too sated to question the possessiveness in her tone. He felt boneless, wrung out in the best possible way. His eyes drifted closed, exhaustion and contentment pulling him toward sleep. He woke to morning light, the first sun's orange glow filtering through the windows. Keyleth still slept beside him, her face peaceful in repose. James took a moment to appreciate how alien and beautiful she was, this princess who had claimed his heart with such certainty. Then he noticed something odd about his reflection in the polished surface of a nearby wall panel. There was a mark on his chest, a symbol that definitely hadn't been there the night before. James sat up carefully, trying not to wake Keyleth, and moved closer to the reflective surface. The mark was about the size of his palm, positioned directly over his heart. It appeared to be composed of light rather than pigment, glowing with a soft blue-white radiance that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The symbol itself was intricate, swirling lines that formed a pattern he couldn't quite decipher, but that somehow suggested wings or flames or both. "You're awake," Keyleth's voice came from the bed, drowsy and content. "I wondered when you'd notice." James turned to face her, his hand instinctively covering the mark. "What is this? What did you do to me?" She rose gracefully, completely unself-conscious in her nudity, and crossed to stand before him. Her fingers gently moved his hand aside, revealing the glowing symbol. "It is exactly what I told you it would be. You are carrying my mark now." "Your mark?" James heard his voice rising toward panic and forced himself to take a breath. "You marked me, like property." "Like a mate," Keyleth corrected, her tone patient but firm. "When Viridians bond with their resonance, the female's essence imprints upon the male. It is a sign to all others that he is claimed, protected, cherished. It is the highest honor my people can bestow." "You should have warned me." James felt anger bubbling up beneath his shock. "You should have told me this would happen before we—" "If I had told you, would you have proceeded?" Her golden eyes met his steadily. "Or would your human need for control have prevented you from experiencing what we shared?" James opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right. If he'd known that sleeping with her would result in some kind of permanent alien branding, he probably would have refused despite his desire. Which meant she'd made the choice for him, and that thought made his anger surge again. That wasn't your decision to make, he said coldly. My body is my own. You had no right. I had every right. Keyleth's voice hardened, an edge of command entering it that reminded him she was royalty, accustomed to being obeyed. You are my resonance, James. That means your body, your heart, your very soul resonates with mine. We are bound now, whether you accept it immediately or not. Bound. The word felt heavy in his mouth. So what? I'm just supposed to accept that I belong to you now. That everyone who sees this mark will know I've been claimed by a Viridian princess. Yes, Keyleth said simply, because that is the truth. You are mine, James Chen. Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to love if you will allow it. And I am yours in equal measure, though my mark does not manifest physically. She reached up to touch the symbol on his chest, and at her contact it flared brighter, sending warmth through his entire body. This mark is fed by my essence, sustained by the bond between us. It will glow when I am near, fade to something less visible when we are apart. It cannot be removed except by death, yours or mine. James felt his legs go weak, and he sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Permanent, visible, a brand that announced to anyone who saw him that he was owned by an alien being. His career in the fleet was effectively over. No way would command allow him to continue serving with this kind of obvious alien influence marked on his body. His entire life had just shifted on its axis, and he hadn't even been given a choice. I need time, he said quietly. Time to process this, time to figure out what it means. Keyleth knelt before him, bringing their faces level. I understand this is difficult for you. Your people value individual autonomy above nearly all else. But my people understand something yours has yet to learn, that true strength comes from connection, not isolation. You are not less because you bear my mark, James. You are more. Protected by the power of the royal house, honored by the bond we share. That's easy for you to say, James muttered. You're not the one branded. Am I not? Keyleth took his hand and pressed it against her chest, over her heart. My mark is internal, but it is no less real. I feel you here constantly. Your emotions echo through me. Your pain is my pain. If you truly cannot accept this bond, it will torment me for the rest of my very long life. The vulnerability in her voice reached through his anger and fear. James looked at her, really looked, and saw the worry in her golden eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She'd gambled everything on this bond, he realized. Her certainty had masked genuine fear that he might reject her. I'm not saying I reject you, he said slowly. But you have to understand, Keyleth, this is a lot. I came here as a diplomat and I'm leaving as someone's marked mate. That's a hell of a change to process. I know. She leaned her forehead against his. And I am sorry I did not give you the choice to proceed with full knowledge, but I could not risk losing you to fear. Call it selfishness if you wish, but I would make the same decision again. They sat in silence for a long moment, James acutely aware of the glowing mark on his chest, the warmth where Keyleth touched him, the impossibility of his situation. Finally, he sighed. What happens now? What does bearing your mark mean practically? Keyleth pulled back, relief evident on her face. It means you are under my protection. No Viridian will harm you or threaten you without answering to me and the full power of the royal house. It means you have status here, second only to myself and my immediate family. And it means, she added with a slight smile, that you belong to me in the eyes of all who see you. That possessiveness thing is going to take some getting used to, James remarked dryly. Viridian females are naturally possessive of their chosen mates, Keyleth explained. It is part of our biology. We claim, we protect, we guard what is ours. You will find that other Viridians treat you with great deference now, knowing whose mark you carry. And what about Earth? What happens when I go home with an alien brand on my chest? Keyleth's expression became guarded. That is something we must discuss. The mark cannot be removed, but there are ways to conceal it temporarily if necessary. However, I would ask that you consider whether returning to Earth is truly what you want. Consider, James felt a chill run through him. Keyleth, I have a life there, a career, family, friends. I can't just abandon all of that. I am not asking you to abandon anything, she said carefully. But the bond between us will become painful if we are separated by great distance for extended periods. And I cannot leave Veridian Prime for more than brief visits. My duties to my people prevent it. The implication hit him like a physical blow. You expect me to stay here, permanently. I hope you will choose to stay, Keyleth corrected. Once you understand the depth of what we share, once you feel the bond fully mature, I believe you will want to be near me as much as I need to be near you. James stood abruptly, needing space. He moved to the window, looking out at the alien cityscape. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of his control. You planned this, he accused. From the moment you decided I was your resonance, you planned to trap me here. Not trap. Keyleth came up behind him but didn't touch him, respecting his need for space. Invite, persuade, hope desperately that you would see what I see, that what we have is worth any sacrifice required to preserve it. Easy to say when you're not the one being asked to give up everything. Is it? Her voice carried an edge of pain. I am fourth in line for the throne, James. My sisters all fulfilled their duty by forming political alliances through marriage. I was expected to do the same, to bond with a high-ranking noble and strengthen the royal house's connections. Instead, I have bonded with a human, a being my people still see as primitive and short-lived. Do you think there will be no consequences for me? No judgment from those who believe I have degraded myself? James turned to face her, seeing the truth of her words in her expression. She was sacrificing something too, he realized. Her reputation, possibly her political standing, all because of this resonance that had struck like lightning between them. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You're right, this is hard for both of us. But worth it, Keyleth insisted, moving closer. Whatever difficulties we face, surely they are worth it for this. She gestured between them, at the connection he could now feel humming like an electric current. Tell me you do not feel it, James. Tell me honestly that what we shared last night was ordinary, and I will find a way to release you from the bond. He wanted to lie, to claim that it had been just physical pleasure between two consenting adults. But he couldn't. What they'd shared had been transcendent, a merging that went beyond mere bodies. And even now, angry and frightened and confused as he was, he could feel the pull toward her, the rightness of her presence beside him. I feel it, he admitted. I just don't know if feeling it is enough to justify turning my entire life upside down. Then let me show you what life here could be like, Keyleth suggested. Not as a diplomat under protocol constraints, but as my acknowledged mate. Let me introduce you to my people properly, show you what status my mark grants you. If after you understand the full reality of the situation, you still wish to return to Earth, I will not stop you, though it will pain me beyond words. James considered her offer. He still had 6 weeks left of his scheduled stay, and she was right. He didn't fully understand Veridian culture or what bearing her mark truly meant. All right, he agreed, but I need some basic rules established. You don't make major decisions about my body or my future without consulting me first. No more surprises. Agreed, Keyleth said immediately. I overstepped last night and I acknowledge that. From this point forward, we discuss and decide together. She extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, James took it. The mark on his chest flared at the contact, and he felt a surge of warmth and affection that he knew came from her through their bond. It was disconcerting but not unpleasant, this echo of her emotions mixing with his own. The rest of that day was spent in her quarters, talking through the practicalities of their situation. Keyleth explained more about the resonance bond, how it would deepen over time, how they would eventually be able to sense each other's emotions and physical states even at a distance. She told him about the rituals her people performed to honor new bonds, the celebrations that would be held once she formally announced him as her mate. Your people are going to celebrate this? James asked, surprised. I thought there might be opposition to you bonding with a human. There will be some who disapprove, Keyleth admitted. But resonance is sacred to Viridians. To deny or condemn it would be considered deeply dishonorable. Whatever they think of humans in general, they will respect the bond because they must. She also explained the practical benefits of bearing her mark. He would have access to royal facilities and resources. Guards would protect him without question. Servants would attend him. He would be included in court functions not as a foreign guest but as a member of the royal household. In effect, he would become Viridian nobility by association. That's a lot of privilege, James observed, and a lot of responsibility too, I'm guessing. You will be expected to conduct yourself in a manner befitting your position, Keyleth confirmed, which means learning our customs more thoroughly, understanding court politics, representing me well in social situations. She smiled slightly. Consider it an extension of your diplomatic duties, but with significantly higher stakes. Over the following days, James got a crash course in what it meant to be the marked mate of a Viridian princess. Keyleth introduced him to her family, starting with her mother, Empress Vithera. The Empress was even more imposing than her daughter, radiating authority that made James understand how she'd held power for over 2 centuries. But she'd been surprisingly warm toward him, examining his mark with approval, and declaring that any being who made her daughter glow so brightly was welcome in the royal house. Her 3 sisters were more varied in their reactions. The eldest, already bonded herself, had been kindly and offered advice on adjusting to Viridian life. The second was clearly skeptical about humans but remained polite. The third, closest to Keyleth in age, had been openly delighted and immediately began planning celebration rituals. The public reaction to his marked status was equally mixed. When Keyleth took him to court functions, James noticed the stares, the whispers. Some Viridians looked at him with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. But none challenged him directly, and all showed the deference Keyleth had promised. The mark on his chest seemed to act as both beacon and shield, advertising his connection to royalty while warning others against disrespect. James found himself adapting faster than he'd expected. The initial shock of the mark had faded, replaced by a growing appreciation for what it represented. Keyleth was attentive without being smothering, passionate without being demanding. She introduced him to Viridian art and literature, took him to the warrior training grounds where she still practiced when time allowed, showed him hidden corners of the palace complex that few outsiders ever saw. And at night, they explored each other with increasing confidence. The physical pleasure was intense, but it was the emotional intimacy that truly surprised James. Through their bond, he could feel her satisfaction when he touched her a certain way, her spike of arousal when he whispered certain things. And she could feel his responses in return, creating a feedback loop of sensation that made their lovemaking almost supernaturally synchronized. One night 3 weeks after their first joining, James woke to find Keyleth tracing the mark on his chest with one finger. Her touch made it glow brighter, pulsing with light. "Does it bother you still?" she asked softly, "carrying my mark?" James considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when I catch my reflection and remember that I'm permanently altered, but less than it did at first." He covered her hand with his, pressing it against the mark. "I'm starting to understand why your people see it as an honor rather than a brand." "Because it represents choice," Keyleth said. "I chose you out of all beings in the universe, and you, despite your initial reluctance, are choosing to stay and see where this bond leads us. That is worth marking, worth celebrating." "I haven't decided to stay permanently," James reminded her. "I agreed to keep an open mind, but that's not the same as committing to live on Viridian Prime forever." "I know," Keyleth shifted to look at him directly, "but you are considering it now, whereas before you would have refused without thought. That is progress." She was right. James had been thinking more and more about what his life might look like here. Earth felt increasingly distant, not just in space but in emotional resonance. His regular communications with command had become perfunctory, his reports technical rather than personal. The friends and colleagues he'd left behind seemed to exist in a different world, one that no longer quite fit him. But there was still the question of his family. His father, still living on Mars colony, his younger sister serving on a merchant vessel. How could he explain this to them? How could he tell them he was staying with an alien species, bound to a princess by a mark he couldn't remove? As if sensing his thoughts through their bond, Keyleth said, "You could bring them here, your family. There are human quarters in the capital now, accommodations for the diplomats and traders who have established permanent presence on Veridian Prime. They could visit, see your new life. Perhaps that would help you decide." "You'd want that?" James asked, surprised. "Meeting my family?" "Of course." Keyleth looked puzzled by the question. "They are part of you. Understanding them helps me understand you better, and if you choose to remain here, they should know you are well cared for, happy even." The idea appealed to James more than he wanted to admit. Having his family see this world, meet Keyleth, witness the reality of his situation rather than trying to explain it through calm messages. "I'll think about it," he promised. The next morning, James drafted a message to his father and sister, carefully explaining the situation. He tried to be honest about the bond, about the mark, about his growing attachment to both Keyleth and this alien world. He expected shock, concern, possibly anger. What he got when the reply came 3 days later was understanding. His father's message was brief but warm. He'd lived long enough, he said, to know that happiness came in unexpected forms. If James had found something genuine with this alien princess, then he deserved to explore it fully. His sister's response was longer and more emotional, but the core message was the same. They supported him, wanted him to be happy, and yes, they would love to visit if the invitation was genuine. James showed the messages to Keyleth, who immediately began making arrangements. "They will come for the formal bonding ceremony," she declared. "It is time we made our union official in the eyes of both our peoples." Formal bonding ceremony. James felt his anxiety spike. That sounds very official and permanent. "It is," Keyleth confirmed. "But it changes nothing that has not already changed, James. You bear my mark. We share a resonance bond. The ceremony simply acknowledges publicly what already exists privately." She cupped his face in her hands. "But if you are not ready, we can wait. I will not force this." James thought about the past weeks, about how naturally he'd slipped into life here, about the way his chest ached when he was away from Keyleth for more than a few hours. The bond had deepened exactly as she'd said it would, until he could barely remember what it felt like to exist without this connection humming beneath his skin. "No forcing necessary," he said quietly. "I think I'm ready." The relief and joy that flooded through their bond nearly overwhelmed him. Keyleth pulled him into a fierce embrace, her strength evident but carefully controlled. "You honor me beyond words," she whispered against his hair. "I swear to you, James Chen, you will never regret this choice." The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. The formal bonding ceremony was a major event, requiring coordination between Veridian traditions and the human witnesses James wanted present. His family arrived 2 weeks before the scheduled date, and watching his father and sister's first reactions to Veridian Prime reminded James of his own initial awe. Keyleth charmed them both within hours. She was respectful to his father, warm with his sister, and clearly devoted to James in a way that needed no translation across species barriers. His father took him aside on the second day of their visit. "She's good for you," the old man said bluntly. "I haven't seen you this settled in years, maybe ever." "You're not bothered that she's, not human?" James asked. His father snorted. "Son, I spent 30 years married to your mother, and half the time I couldn't figure out what she was thinking. At least with the princess, you've got that bond thing to help with communication." He grew more serious. "I won't lie and say it's not strange, seeing that mark on you, but it's also beautiful in its way, evidence of something real and permanent in an uncertain universe. The ceremony itself was held at sunset when all three suns descended toward the horizon simultaneously, painting the sky in impossible colors. James wore formal Viridian court attire that had been specially tailored for his smaller frame, deep blue fabric that complemented Keyleth's silver and white ensemble. The mark on his chest was visible through the translucent material, glowing steadily as he stood beside her before the assembled court. The Empress presided over the ritual, speaking in formal Viridian that James had learned well enough to understand. She spoke of resonance and destiny, of bonds that transcended species and expectation, of the courage required to follow one's heart across the stars. Then she turned to James directly. "James Chen of Earth, you bear the mark of my daughter. Do you accept this bond freely, understanding its permanence and its power?" "I do," James said clearly, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "And do you swear to honor this bond, to stand beside Keyleth as her mate and partner, to uphold the dignity of the royal house?" "I swear it." The Empress nodded, satisfied, then turned to her daughter. "Keyleth, fourth daughter of Viridian Prime, you have claimed this being as your resonance. Do you accept the responsibilities this entails?" "I do with all my heart." "Then before these witnesses, I declare your bond officially recognized. May your lives be long and your connection eternal." The crowd erupted in a cascade of chiming sounds, the Viridian equivalent of applause. Keyleth took James's hands, and the mark on his chest blazed so brightly that several gasps rippled through the audience. Then she kissed him, deep and possessive and claiming, and he felt the bond solidify into something unbreakable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the crowd's chiming had grown even louder. James looked out at the sea of alien faces, some approving, some still skeptical, all acknowledging what had just occurred. Then his eyes found his father and sister in the front row, both smiling despite the tears on his sister's face. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night. James danced with Keyleth to music that didn't quite match human rhythms but felt natural in her arms. He spoke with nobles and dignitaries who now treated him as one of their own. He laughed with his sister and watched his father charm several Viridian matrons with stories about Mars' colony. Late in the evening, Keyleth pulled him away from the crowd to a balcony overlooking the city. The three moons had risen, smaller than Earth's but somehow brighter, turning the crystalline towers into prismatic sculptures. "Happy?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Surprisingly, yes," James admitted, leaning back against her. "A few months ago, if someone had told me I'd end up bonded to an alien princess, I would have laughed. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He turned in her embrace to face her. "You said the mark represents choice. I'm finally understanding what you meant. Every day I wake up here, I choose this. I choose you." Keyleth's golden eyes shimmered with emotion. "And I choose you, my stubborn human. Today, tomorrow, for as long as we both live." She kissed him again, gentler this time, and James felt the bond pulse between them like a heartbeat. The mark on his chest glowed in response, visible even through his formal attire. He was marked, claimed, bound to this alien woman in ways he was still learning to understand. And somehow, impossibly, it felt exactly right. They returned to the celebration hand in hand, James bearing the mark of his mate with pride now rather than uncertainty. His old life on Earth felt like a distant dream, something that had happened to a different person. This was his reality now, Viridian Prime, the royal court, a bond that went deeper than mere biology. Later, in the privacy of their shared chambers, Keyleth slowly removed his formal attire, revealing the mark in all its glowing glory. She traced it with reverent fingers, and James felt the gesture echo through their bond as both touch and promise. "Mine," she whispered, the possessiveness in her voice making him shiver with pleasure. "Yours," he agreed, reaching up to pull her down to him. completely and utterly yours. They made love with the unhurried intensity of those who know they have all the time in the universe, the mark pulsing brighter with each touch, each whispered word, each shared breath. And in the aftermath, as they lay tangled together in the cooling night air, James traced the symbol on his chest and marveled at how something that had initially terrified him had become his greatest source of pride. He was marked, claimed, property of a queen as the original words had suggested, but property implied no agency, no choice, no reciprocal devotion. And what he had with Keyleth was so much more than simple ownership. It was partnership, passion, and promise all bound up in one glowing symbol. "What are you thinking?" Keyleth asked drowsily, her fingers playing through his hair. "That I need to send a formal resignation to the Terran Expeditionary Fleet," James replied. "Can't exactly continue my duties with alien royalty marks all over my chest." He felt her smile against his shoulder. "They are going to be very disappointed to lose you." "They'll survive. Besides, I'm pretty sure being consort to a Viridian princess counts as an acceptable career change." "Consort," Keyleth tested the word. "I like that. It suggests partnership rather than simple mate pairing." "That's what we are, aren't we?" James shifted to look at her. "Partners in this impossible, wonderful situation we've created." "Partners," Keyleth agreed, "though I am still the dominant one." James laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuine happiness. "Keep telling yourself that, Your Highness." She pinned him to the bed with effortless strength, looming over him with mock severity. "Are you challenging me, human?" "Maybe," James teased, running his hands up her arms. "What are you going to do about it?" Her answer involved thoroughly demonstrating exactly who was dominant, leaving them both satisfied and exhausted as the first sun began its rise over the alien city. James watched the light paint patterns across Keyleth's blue skin, still amazed that this was his life now. His family stayed for another week before returning to their respective posts, both satisfied that James had found genuine happiness. His father's parting words were simple. "Love isn't about where or who, son. It's about finding someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway. You've found that. Don't let it go." James had no intention of letting go. Over the following months, he settled fully into Viridian life. He took lessons in advanced language and court protocol. He trained with Keyleth in the warrior grounds, learning to compensate for his smaller size with speed and strategy. He attended diplomatic functions now as her acknowledged consort, using his unique perspective to strengthen ties between Viridian Prime and Earth. The mark on his chest became so familiar he barely noticed it except when others commented. And they did comment. Viridians could read the symbol like a signature, recognizing Keyleth's essence bound into its pattern. It granted him status, yes, but also a strange form of celebrity. He was the human who had won a princess's resonance, the outsider who had been claimed by royalty. Some nights, lying beside Keyleth in their shared bed, James would think about the person he'd been before that shuttle touched down on Viridian soil. That man had been confident in his career path, certain of his independence, convinced he needed no one. This man was bound, marked, claimed, and happier than he'd ever imagined possible. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked one night, the question that had been building for weeks finally finding voice. "Claiming me so quickly before I fully understood." Keyleth considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I regret not giving you more choice in the matter," she said finally. "But I do not regret the outcome. You are the best thing that has happened to me in over a century of life, James. I would endure any consequence to keep you." Even reduced standing at court. James had heard the whispers, knew that some nobility still disapproved of her choice. "Even that," she pulled him closer. "Status is meaningless without someone to share it with. You have taught me that." 6 months after the bonding ceremony, Keyleth was chosen to lead a diplomatic mission to the outer systems. It would take 3 months, and though James was invited to join her, he chose instead to remain on Veridian Prime, partly to demonstrate his commitment to his new home, partly to continue his own studies and training. The separation was harder than either had anticipated. The bond that had become so natural, so comfortable, turned painful when stretched across light years. James could feel her absence like a physical ache, the mark on his chest dimming noticeably without her presence to feed it. He threw himself into work and training, anything to distract from the hollow feeling of being apart from his mate. When Keyleth finally returned, James was waiting on the landing platform just as she'd waited for him all those months ago. She descended the shuttle ramp, saw him, and crossed the distance between them in seconds. Their reunion kiss was passionate enough to make the attending guards discreetly look away. "Never again," Keyleth murmured against his mouth. 3 months was torment. "Agreed," James said fervently. The mark on his chest had flared back to full brightness the moment she touched him, and the sense of completeness was almost overwhelming. "Where you go, I go. No more separations." They returned to their quarters and reaffirmed their bond with an intensity that left them both trembling. And afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, James traced the glowing mark on his chest and felt nothing but gratitude for the day an alien princess had decided he was hers. Time passed in a rhythm of days and seasons that felt nothing like Earth's patterns, but became familiar nonetheless. James learned to read the triple sunset like others read clocks. He developed friendships with Veridian nobles who saw past his human origins to the person beneath. He became fluent enough in formal Veridian to deliver speeches at state functions without embarrassment. And always, constantly, he wore Keyleth's mark with growing pride. It was no longer a brand that embarrassed him or a symbol he struggled to explain. It was proof of bond, promise, and choice. His choice to stay, her choice to love him, their shared choice to build something unprecedented between two species. One evening, nearly a year after his arrival, James stood on their private balcony watching the city lights flicker to life. Keyleth joined him, wrapping her arms around him in the way that had become so natural. "I spoke with the Empress today," she said quietly, "about children." James felt his heart skip. They'd discussed the possibility before, though the biological complexities remained uncertain. "What did she say?" he asked, turning in her embrace. Keyleth smiled, golden eyes shining with hope and promise. "She said that resonance creates possibilities where none should exist, and that if any human and Veridian could make this work, it would be us." Thanks for watching. Click subscribe and check out the next video.